So today I shall be doing a little bit more in painting for both my assault frigate and also my bulk cruiser. Unfortunately, I have just had about a week off down with COVID, which has been unfortunate, but these things occur. So what I'm going to be doing is I will be using this grey colour, sombre grey, to basically paint all of this superstructure all here. It's very similar to what the Nebula B structure is like as a second base coat, pretty much. So I have a little paint palette that I put everything in. Actually, it's for batteries, button batteries, but I found that it's very handy for a paint palette sort of thing, very cheap sort of thing. So just making sure it's nice and wet and using a very soft brush because I don't like to leave a lot of hard streaks. Now, all the material that I've seen of bulk carriers and also of the assault frigate, and you can see it with the Nebula B, that a lot of the substructure of the ship is all in this grey tone. Interesting enough, if you look down the front, it's all white here, but when you have a look at other organizations that do it, like the Micro Machines, or on the computer game, or even on the internet, all of that structure is also in that grey colour because of the fact that it's supposed to be part of a structure, part of a superstructure that's just been ripped out. So just loosely painting. Unfortunately, I won't be able to do too much in the way of painting all my models yet. I found out that quite a lot of my colours have dried out over the last summer, primarily because I don't always use lots of colour. I usually sort of have like a phase where I go through one main colour for about a period of about a month sort of thing, and don't bother with hardly any other types of colours sort of thing until suddenly something happens that I need a different format. So quite a lot of my greys, quite a lot of my whites that I would not normally use for my other game systems, except when I'm doing snow, or like I'm doing right now, some superstructure of starships. Quite a lot of those colours are gone hard and completely unable to be reconstituted. Yeah. So I do plan on making a bit of a shopping trip later this week, get some more paint, and then possibly on the weekend, if I'm up to it, paint some more. I'll probably be able to paint the engine because I've got some nice dark greys that I can do around here to start off with. But this light grey is more so just going to be for the starting point of the superstructure. Just like that. The other thing why I'm using a soft brush is because with the bulk cruiser having all of this bump area, not really flat surface, you don't really want to use a harsh brush whereby it only is being painted exactly where you put it. You want to be able to, for the brushes to move ever so slightly to cover the whole area. Now, in some ways at this stage, seeing I'm only just doing a second primary coat in certain areas, it doesn't matter if you don't get all of it or even if you go over areas. As long as you can clean them up while they're still wet. Or alternatively, if the colour that you end up planning on going over the top is going to be strong enough to actually cover that initial pigmentation. So as you can see right there, I did a little bit of smear while it's still wet. Just running it over with the finger or a cotton bud or something or other will generally get rid of him. So you can see that there's these two sections right here that looks like exposed superstructure, so I'm going to do them in grey as well. And as you can see, you've got all of this area right here. The armor section, I'm going to keep the base coat sort of thing and then lighten it up ever so slightly with some watered down skeleton bone crossed with white sort of thing, maybe as a 50-50 mix sort of thing. I'll do some experimentation. But all the superstructure will go into this grey colour. Sometimes I find just adding a little bit of water will help sort of thin it out a little bit sort of thing. Obviously the pigmentation, it gets lost, but it spreads it a little bit easier. You just have to be careful. Being able to use a stand of some sort or a tool, there's plenty of expensive ones out there that helps you to paint, can be useful. I just find it easier just to use a stand sort of thing. sometimes I even use like hold on to my hand if I'm planning on just painting one section of it. But I also find the control of having something large to hold it steady while I manipulate it around can be good. I've heard of people use things like electronic circuit board holders. I find that they're okay. I just find that sometimes with the actual manipulation, it's a little bit harder. That being said, I haven't tried any of the new Games Workshop holders for paints, for models. I do have had a look at them and they do look pretty impressive. But no, I haven't had a chance to try one yet. As you can see, it's coming along well. Now, I'm going to have to do in here. That's going to be quite difficult in some ways. And then I got to go and do the underside underneath this bit. So right about here. I do have some thinner brushes. I do find using older brushes useful for doing larger, and then using newer brushes which have still all their bristles intact and in, I guess, a very clean format, better for when I'm actually doing some of the more intricate spots. That's looking pretty good. Obviously, one of the things that I'll do once I've painted the rest of this model is probably put a bit more of a black wash or a strong tone wash, more likely a null wash. Null wash just to sort of into all the grooves to highlight the top, the raised areas more so than anything else. As you can see, I use a variety of different paints. Usually for the flat paints or the large paints, I'll generally go for an army painter sort of thing. When I start looking for individual shades or colours, I'll go to a Games Workshop panel, figure out whether or not they've got a close approximation. If they don't, then I have to think about testing and creating my own colour in many ways. one thing I always notice with any miniatures that I paint, sometimes being too aggressive in how much you paint can lead to not being able to go back and just clean it up. So I always try and do what I can small first before I go and just in some ways take a risk sort of thing. So like, for example, if I'm going to go straight down here sort of thing, I don't want to get much in the way of colour on either side. So let's see how I go. You got to admit it about Mel's Shapeway that he has done a very good job. Some models that I've seen of bulk carriers X and the assault frigate, all of this piping and superstructure area sort of thing, it's just one dimensional. It doesn't have the idea of it being rough, it being exposed, being in many ways just what it is. It looks almost like another ship. Now, as you can see, I've done a bit over here sort of thing. Yeah, I can try and sort of reduce it by taking some water and then wiping it while it's still wet. As you can see, it did fade a bit, not too much, but it did fade a little bit. Like I said, I'm going to overpaint all of this anyway with a bit more of a watered down white and skeleton bone to actually help the colour anyway, so I'll just not worry too much about that. Yeah, that's coming along well. Obviously there'll be things that I can't do because of the excess, the way the model is. I can't sort of go all the way around right now this pin. Once I've painted this section right here sort of thing, I'll let it dry, take the base off and do the final bits sort of thing. But now you can really see the start of how it looks like. The other thing I think about Mel's is that sometimes when you have models, it's so easy just to do a mirror image of what is on the left and on the right sort of thing. So if you look at this panel right here, sort of thing, it's got 1, 2, 3, 4 striations down, sort of thing. If you zoom in a little bit closer, I wonder if I can on the, yeah, there we go. So you can see that panel right there does sort of look like that panel, but not quite. Sometimes it's so easy for people to just make one side exactly the same as the other. But I do believe that Mel genuinely looks up all the information, makes certainly a lot of cross checks as to what they look like in reality. Well, not in reality, but in the canon and the lore of the games, sort of thing, that they all have slightly modified or slightly different looks. It's always handy to look at it from a couple of different perspectives. Obviously, this area right here is going to be terrible to try and get into, so I'm just going to switch to a finer brush sort of thing. Just dab a very small amount of paint. I like these brushes, that the tips are quite small, but the handle actually is quite bigger, so you can have a lot more control in it. Sometimes I find using very small brushes, they don't give as much control to a person's hand. Of course, the other problem that it is using fine type brushes like that, you can't use lots, or you can't cover lots of paint at the one time. You have to sort of do it fairly slowly. So you can see that there is a little bit of yellow up there still, sort of thing. So I've heard people use wet palettes. I've tried using them and they do work for occasion, but I also find sometimes that I don't really need to keep paint on exposed for a long time. I only use small dabs. Obviously it's different if I'm actually creating a color or creating a shade. I'll want to make a bit, but that's when I have some spare paint pots that I use to create the color, make sure that I write down. Yep, that's another key thing that I always try and remember to do, is if I make a color, make sure you get your ratios written down. Like one drop of this to 2 drops of that, or whatever. Anyway, that's it. I'll do a bit more and that's it.